Look at the price of a tomato now. Look at the empty shelf, where cooking oil used to be. Look at the weather report. It sounds less like a forecast and more like a warning. Then go outside, press your shoe into garden soil that should be soft, and feel it hit like brick. People are told this is just bad luck, inflation, climate, poor planning, a skill issue. But the pattern is too precise. We are living inside a food system that fails in the exact same direction. Every time, more cost, less resilience, more dependence, less control. That is why a single tree like this feels almost offensive, not because it is exotic, because it exposes how unnatural our normal has become. Think about what you're actually dependent on right now. Lettuce trucked from hundreds or thousands of miles away. Fertilizer made from fossil fuel. Water pumped by vulnerable infrastructure. For thousands of years, people didn't need a white paper to understand that. They watched what survived when the wells got low and the fields gave up. In dry places where ordinary crops failed, this tree stayed alive. Its leaves were eaten, its pods were cooked, and that is the part modern life hides from you best. Resilience rarely looks glamorous. It looks like a roadside tree, a clay pot of murky water turning clear, a handful of leaves that quietly contain more nutrition than the expensive foods sold as solutions. So when people hear about a tree that can help feed people, clean water, and produce usable oil, they usually respond with curiosity. They should respond with anger, because if something this versatile still grows wild across dozens of countries, then our vulnerability is not purely natural. That shift didn't happen because it was the only way to grow food. It happened because a petroleum empire needed a second life. When kerosene began losing ground, gasoline became the rescue. When engines spread, farming was redesigned around them. Tractors replaced animals, diesel pumps replaced hand irrigation. And once you see the pattern, it is hard to unsee. The same system that sells fuel also sells the fix. For the damage fuel-based farming creates. Tilling exposes soil, burns off organic matter, breaks fungal threads, and leaves the surface naked under heat and wind. Then the soil dries faster, crusts harder, erodes easier, and suddenly you need more irrigation. Synthetic fertilizer gives the plant a sugar rush, fast green growth with weak immunity, which attracts pests. Even the language is a disguise. Feed the plant, clean bed, improve the soil, nutrition boost. It sounds scientific, it sounds responsible, but underneath the branding is a war against the very organisms that make fertility possible for free. The fungal network that trades minerals for sugars, the bacteria that cycle nutrients on demand, the worms that open channels for water and air, the invisible immune system of the ground. You can see the symptoms everywhere. Hard pan a few inches down, water pooling on top, then disappearing by noon, lettuce that bolts under stress, tomatoes that look huge one week and sickly the next, seedlings that yellow unless fed again, bags of vegetable soil stacked in the car trunk like emergency medicine, receipts from the garden center getting longer while the harvest gets smaller. That is why the old promise was so dangerous. A farmer who can make fertility on site, save seed, use biomass, cycle water, and grow fuel from plants, is not just self-reliant. That farmer is harder to control. So the winning model wasn't the one that built healthy soil. It was the one that locked food production to refineries, pipelines, engines, and chemical supply chains. Once that infrastructure spread, it didn't just move products. But if that were true, why does every season demand more? Why does the improved field become less sponge-like, less forgiving, less alive? Why do the costs rise while the biology falls? Because the scam is not only what they sold, it is what they replaced. They replaced living fertility with manufactured fertility. So if your soil seems tired, if your beds only perform when fed from a bottle, if your land gets weaker the more you manage it, that is not proof the chemical model works. It is proof it broke the thing it claims to save. And once you understand that, the question changes. Not what product am I missing, but what living process was interrupted, because that is where the real leverage begins. The most expensive input on a farm is often the one nobody can see, because once you strip out the hidden biology, a field stops acting like an ecosystem and starts acting like a patient on life support. That is the part industrial agriculture trained people to forget. Not just trees, not just diversity, the operating code underneath. A living soil is not brown dirt. It is architecture, it is traffic, it is negotiation. 1 teaspoon can hold billions of bacteria, threads of fungi finer than hair, protozoa hunting, nematodes grazing, arthropods shredding leaf litter into smaller and smaller pieces, until yesterday's waste becomes tomorrow's fertility. Now picture What happens when that economy is replaced by a bag? You spread soluble nitrogen, and the plant gets a quick green hit. But the old trade starts collapsing. Why would roots invest in microbial alliances when calories are no longer needed to buy nutrients? Fungal networks shrink, soil aggregates break apart, rain that used to soak in now runs sideways. Sun hits bare ground and the surface bakes. A field can look productive while its engine is being dismantled. That is how dependency hides, not as a dramatic failure at first, but as a quiet loss of function, more fertilizer to replace missing biology. A moringa tree in a mixed farm is not just another crop. It changes the physics around it. Stand under one at noon, and you can feel the temperature drop. That is microclimate, not magic. Leaves intercept brutal sunlight. Shade slows evaporation. Wind is broken into softer currents. Humidity hangs a little longer near the ground. The soil under a tree doesn't get hammered the same way by sun and rain. So microbes stay active longer. Worms travel higher, and fine feeder roots can keep working instead of shutting down. Leaf fall becomes a steady ration of carbon, and below that visible canopy, another system starts linking everything together. Fungal hyphae move through soil like living threads, joining root zones that would otherwise be isolated. This isn't a fantasy internet with messages and intentions. It is plumbing and exchange. Fungi extend the reach of roots far beyond what a plant can physically touch, pulling in phosphorus, zinc, moisture, trace minerals. In return, plants feed them sugars made from sunlight. Cut the trees, plow the ground hard, dump salts year after year, and those networks tear apart. Leave roots in place, feed the surface, reduce disturbance, and the web thickens again. Suddenly, one rain goes further, one mulch layer lasts longer. One tree begins helping the crops around it survive a week that would have killed them in open heat. Once you see that, the historical scam becomes clearer. The choice was never simply between traditional and modern. It was between systems that build fertility in place, and systems that sell it back to you, season after season. A food forest, a hedgerow, a tree line, a patchwork field, with moringa cycling biomass into the ground. These are not quaint village aesthetics. So when researchers kept proving that moringa could feed people, clean water, and support resilient farms, the threat was larger than one useful tree. The threat was the reminder that nature had already written a cheaper operating manual. A manual that doesn't begin in a refinery, a bank loan, or a development office. It begins with roots trading in the dark, fungi stitching soil together, leaf litter becoming fertility, and a farm creating its own buffer against heat, drought, and scarcity. Here is the part almost nobody is taught, because it sounds too small to matter. You don't always fix a broken food system by adding more. Sometimes you remove the disturbance, place one cheap layer in the right spot, and let biology take over the labor bill. Take the most ordinary object in the modern waste stream, a plain brown cardboard box. No glossy print, no plastic tape. Lay it directly over hard, weedy ground, and soak it. Cover it with leaves, straw, chipped branches, half-finished compost, even kitchen scraps under another dry layer. Then walk away. That sounds lazy. A lot of people sabotage themselves right here, because they've been trained to equate effort with progress. Dig deeper, turn harder, buy more bags, correct more deficiencies. But soil isn't a concrete slab that needs force. It is a living economy. Every time you overwork it, you break the fungal threads that move water. You expose carbon to air, you wake dormant weed seeds, and you create the very fragility that requires another purchased fix. You can see this in a single summer. One patch is left bare because it looks tidy. By July, it is cracked, hot, and thirsty by noon. Water hits the surface and runs off. Lettuce bolts, basil stalls. You end up standing there with a hose like life support. Right beside it, another patch stays hidden, under leaves and stems and old cardboard. Put your hand under that mulch at 3 p.m., and the soil is cool, damp, and if you want an even stronger move, bury wood. Not lumber, not treated boards, actual fallen branches, half-rotten logs. Prunings, too awkward for the bin. Pile them in a shallow trench or mound them low. Then cover with whatever organic matter you have, and top with soil or compost if available. This is the opposite of the neat raised bed aesthetic sold in catalogs, and that is exactly why it works. The wood becomes a slow battery. In the first season, it starts holding water. You don't need a perfect design. You need a shift in relationship. Stop asking what input you should buy, and start asking what process you can stop interrupting. Fallen leaves aren't trash, they're topsoil in transit. Kitchen scraps aren't smell problems if covered properly. they're microbial income. Pruned branches aren't disposal problems, they're sponge material. Even shade, which many beginners treat like an enemy, can be a strategic ally. This is the uncomfortable truth for the input economy. The cheapest interventions often have the longest tail. A free mulch layer can save more water than an expensive irrigation upgrade. A buried log can stabilize a bed longer than a season of soluble feed. A patch of living ground cover can suppress weeds better than repeated hand labor. These aren't tricks, they're leverage points, and that matters far beyond one backyard. Because every time a household learns to keep moisture in the soil with waste materials, how to grow into partial shade instead of fighting it, how to turn cardboard, sticks, and leaves into fertility, dependence loosens a little. The supply chain still matters, the store still exists, the market still moves. But panic has less power over someone whose system is beginning to cooperate with itself. In unstable years, that is not gardening advice. The most radical thing may be how unglamorous it is. No patented inoculant, no miracle bottle, no machine roaring across the yard. Just a layer, a pile, a pause. Less digging, less exposure, less control. And then the strange result. Modern agriculture trained us not to expect. By doing less, more life shows up, more moisture stays put. That is the real end point here. Not a clever bed, not a rustic project for social media. A self-reinforcing system that gets easier as it matures and asks less from fragile supply lines. So if you had to bet on one edible crop to protect first with a system like this, what would it be? The final divide is this. When shelves get stripped, one person is left holding a receipt and another is holding food. That is where all of this leads. Not to a prettier garden, not to a clever little homestead fantasy, to a brutally simple difference in power. When trucks stop, prices spike, water restrictions hit, or a storm tears through the grid. The question is no longer whether your setup looked impressive online. That is why this matters beyond technique. A resilient food system is not a lifestyle accessory. It is a private treaty between you and the living world. You protect soil, seed, water, shade, and diversity. In return, they reduce your dependence on distant factories, fragile logistics, and institutions that only function when everything is normal, and everything is not going to stay normal. We have already seen the pattern. Empty produce sections, rationed eggs, salad greens priced like luxury goods, fertilizer shocks passed down as grocery pain. One disruption echoing through 10 aisles. Most people experience that as anxiety. They refresh delivery apps, they watch prices climb, they buy whatever is left. That basket is not symbolic. It has weight. Wet leaves, actual roots, herbs you cut with your fingers, tubers brushed clean at the sink, a few jars in a cool, dark space, seeds saved in envelopes, maybe not abundance in the supermarket sense, not endless choice in plastic packaging, but something far more serious. Continuity. This is where growing food stops being a hobby and starts becoming leverage. Because leverage is not just how much you produce, it is how many bad options you remove from your life. Fewer emergency store runs, fewer moments where your health is negotiated by inflation, fewer weeks where you are forced to eat what ships well, instead of what nourishes well, a small bed, a patch of perennial greens, a few reliable calorie crops, a tree that keeps producing through heat and neglect. These are not quaint gestures, and the deeper truth is even harder to say out loud. Dependence trains obedience. If every meal must pass through a chain you don't control, then your body is downstream from decisions made by strangers who will never meet you. Fuel costs, policy errors, crop failures, commodity traders, packaging shortages, border delays. You feel all of it in your stomach. Food sovereignty breaks that spell, even if only partially at first. A balcony herb pot does not overthrow an empire, but it does change your posture. That is, the dignity industrial food quietly stole. Not just nutrients, not just soil agency, the old confidence that some part of your tomorrow can still be grown by your own hands, in your own place, under your own care. In unstable times, that confidence becomes priceless, because when the headlines turn frantic and everyone rushes toward the same fluorescent aisles, you move in the opposite direction, toward the side yard. And that image is the real ending. Other people are panic buying shelf-stable substitutes, arguing over limits, loading carts with whatever remains. You are rinsing leaves. So if you take one lesson from all this, let it be this. Do not measure your growing space by whether it looks impressive. Measure it by what it frees you from. Because in the years ahead, the most valuable harvest may not be volume. It may be options.